this is an informal. But hi everyone, so I'm happy to introduce Elena Glassman. She is a professor from Harvard University and has done a bunch of work in human-computer interaction, got a bunch of, a bunch of really cool paper from top-tier conference in human-computer interaction. And her recent work also involves some tools that support research scientists and also with the use of visual intelligence. And so in this talk, she is going to tell us about how to do that to help researcher read and write. Yeah.
Thanks, Pal. Yeah, Pal, a graduate of Harvard HCI from before my time there. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. I'm extraordinarily excited to be here. I think I've been aspiring to come in person to visit you guys for years, but a lot of the projects that I was working on with this particular approach that I have, when I tried to apply it to scientific papers, I hit a brick wall. I shouldn't say brick wall. Dan and I, so Dan and I tried to do what we call now AbstractExplorer on abstracts with a wonderful master's student at UW during the depths of the pandemic. And, we put what we did on archive and it was, it was an important step in refining our understanding, but it didn't feel like we had kind of cracked the code. And so actually, yeah, I'm very thrilled that Joyce decided to rejoin us for attempt N. And now I can talk about it because it just got accepted to WIST. And in fact, this is the first time I'm presenting it. So it's I am learning how to teach it to other people. And I definitely do not want this to feel like I'm talking at you. I'm hoping that collectively we can make sense of these ideas, and you can feel free to interrupt me if it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So I also just want to call out before I get started into my particular vision that I was really inspired by your vision here, especially the semantic reader project, right? The sheer the power of this kind of coordinated vision and having a platform in which all these different features could be powered by your APIs and feed into an enhanced reading experience is wonderful to see. And I'm also, I've been had folks come to Harvard, and it's been lovely. So just to come and tell you about maybe hopefully a complementary vision. So it may, some of my stuff, maybe, there's a role for it in a future version of Semantic Reader, or maybe it's just a completely different way of thinking about things, but still would benefit from things like your APIs. Okay, so we've got AbstractExplorer and CorpusStudio. Those are the two projects I'll focus on today. AbstractExplorer is for what we call comparative close reading at scale, right? Close reading is where you have, it really is a term that comes from, say, the humanities, where you're engaged in the text, right? So distant reading would be the exact opposite, where you're, looking at dots, some network graph of citations, and comparative close reading here, because we're pre-processing abstracts and kind of trying to align them against each other so you can see how they are similar and different at the text of the actual abstract itself. You don't have to worry about an LLM, introducing any extraneous information or omitting some critical information. It's just the text itself. Not to say that you couldn't bring LLMs into it, and they do play an important role, but this is very important to me. And then the second project is about basically writing better, being more informed about the corpus that you are trying to contribute to as you write. So I will call out, actually, we had a conversation earlier this year. I just came from a responsible AI mini workshop, more south down the coast. And, people said oh, 2025 is the year of the agent. And I think it's great that we as a community kind of cycle through different things that we're collectively enthusiastic about. But I'm hoping we'll have some time at the end to reflect on in an age where we can delegate so much more than we ever could to AI, to reflect on the value of personal engagement in activities and allow ourselves to strategically do that delegation with awareness of the value that we may be giving up, right, that becomes inaccessible because of that delegation, or that might be cut off in the future. So, so I'm really hoping that we get to a place where the resources that go to agentic AI feed into interfaces that complement more kind of antiquated, if you will, forms of information that we provide to people. So in that light, I put in a request to the get an API key, because the two systems that I'm going to show you, I think, will not be more than research prototypes if we don't have access to that kind of information. All right, so yeah, I'm really excited that the open data platform that you guys have been talking about has been updated as of 2025, but there's been some archives, so I want to better understand how we can work with you through that API. Okay, so CorpusStudio. This was presented at CHI 2025. This is a collaboration between my student Chelsea Swopes and Hai Dang, who just graduated from Daniel Buschek's lab in Germany. And we were particularly interested in the very effortful activity of writing a paper, especially for a particular audience, because honestly, anytime you're writing, you are writing for an audience, unless you're writing for yourself, in which case it's still effortful, you're refining your ideas. And so effective communication often requires reasoning about the receiver's expectations, right? So for example, if you are, there's like rules, if you violate them, you can distract or confuse the reader. There might be information that they're interested in that you happen to put in the wrong place, so they can't find it, or it's not there at all, right? There's this adage, know the rules so you can break them effectively. So, you know, oftentimes in interdisciplinary research, you'll receive a paper and a review, and you'll say like, wow, like people are not from our community because they're breaking all of these rules. They're probably complying with rules of some other community. They're trying to speak to us, right? And a good reviewer will try to get at what they need, you know, and maybe give guidance, right? It becomes almost basically a usability issue. It doesn't necessarily mean that the paper's not good. We can bring in AI to assist folks in this exercise, but there's some dangers associated with the ways that this typically is done. Okay, so a lot of AI-assisted writing systems will generate text, but it might be too close to a particular source document, and you basically have no way of knowing, right? So it's not just a question of attribution; it's a question of like, you know, I have personal standards in terms of how close my text is to other text. And here at LLM, you know, it has no notion of that. And so I do not want to consume text that's generated, even if it gives me some options or retrieves some various, if it gives me a couple options for me to choose between, I still might anchor on some of them. And if they're retrieved snippets from other papers, I could, you know, set myself up for failure in terms of plagiarizing as well. I could fine tune a large language model on my corpus to help me kind of make it more useful as I write in this kind of generation scenario, but it's even really hard to figure out what effect that fine tuning had, right? It's kind of like there's a lot delegated to the AI, and I would say that's too much. So instead, we tried an alternative approach. We tried retrieving not just a couple examples, one of which you might anchor on. We retrieved many, many, many examples from a corpus of papers that were likely to inform your readers' expectations, right? So you're writing a systems paper. This is a corpus of systems papers previously published in your community. And so by retrieving rather than generating, we get rid of this unintentional plagiarism issue. By showing more than a couple of examples, we have, you don't necessarily anchor. The corpus is from what your readers have probably already read, okay? And these retrieved examples kind of become fodder for your thought potentially, as well as they become things that we can compute and render cross-document relationships on. You know, all the sentences that describe the experimental setup, there's certain kind of ways in which we expect to read about a controlled user study, right? And it's nice for new students who haven't written a paper before to kind of see, hey, this is typically how it's written. right? I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can sound very similar to those, or for someone who's trying to, teach a new person, show this is how it's typically written, or just to kind of help you see emergent schemas where you hadn't noticed them. So that's how, by computing these cross-example relationships, we help you deal with the many, right? So we almost create a problem by retrieving so many, and then we try to address that problem by reifying the relationships between them. Okay, so we do this at the document level by using positional diction clustering, which is from this prior Kai paper supporting sense-making of large language model outputs at scale. And we look at all the outlines of the papers, right? So like there's a particular structure to papers that you're trying in the community you're writing for. We basically just see, we kind of like align them with each other and then turn that into this called like order histogram, right? So most start with an introduction. Occasionally they have a background section. Sometimes there's a related work. Most of the time in our community, the related work is up at the front, but occasionally there's a separate cluster of related work down at the bottom. Maybe there's a formative study. Almost all of the papers have a study design or system design. We underline just the system in system design because as a naming convention, we try to highlight to give you a sense of what's within that cluster of section titles. Will underline the terms that are always there in every cluster item, because each of these, right, are cluster, and naming clusters is always hard. And so that's the first example of computing and rendering cross-document relationships across papers in the corpus. So now you can, you can perhaps this can inform you as you structure your paper. If you're going to break with what's typical, that's okay, right? You might even be inspired to break with what's typical if you see that someone else, a minority of the cases, they made a particular choice and that choice works really well for you as well. Okay, so
I mean, of course, if you're writing the paper and you realize I need a section called formative study, that's maybe a little bit too late.
Right. So I guess you probably
built your system stuff.
True. So maybe this should not just be at the writing phase, but also in the conceptualizing the entire project. So we also do this at the sentence level. So you got document level support when you're, but also at the sentence level, we basically look at every sentence in the full text of the paper in the corpus, and we concatenate the section content, or sorry, the section title with, this is the part that I built because I usually worry about the user interface. So basically, we're every sentence in the full text is encoded with knowledge of where it occurred in the paper, in terms of like what section, and then we have in a as you are typing in a text buffer, we look at what section title you're working within, and then we use both that information to query into find related sentences in the corpus, right? So we kind of are, it's not a strict limit. I can't, when I'm retrieving related sentences from other papers, I'm not strictly limited to, sections with the same title, but there's some related reasoning about both the sentence content that I'm trying to write, as well as position across papers. And so once we've retrieved those analogous sentences from other papers, we do some post-processing to try and reify, for example, the same word that shows up across them. This is a really, really dirt simple way of reifying relationships across these, but it's better than nothing. I think we're trying to support your interior structural mapping engine. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but to give you a sense of this theory that has been influencing our thought a great deal. Structural mapping theory is a description from cognitive science and psychology about how we form mental models from concrete examples by doing comparison between the different objects. And so it's how we form abstractions, generalizations, or even, and also like cute, really notice anomalies that are interesting. A lot of our tools in the end have an element where we're trying to support that internal structural mapping engine that's doing the comparison. It's very difficult for people to do that for text. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I missed a
Please.
little bit of the point here for doing this mapping at this level.
Yeah. So the point is for you to have both high and low level kind of mental model as you're typing up your paper about the corpus that you are trying to join.
Like picking up that last example then, having something when I'm writing telling me, gosh, I should have reached out to my participants via email, but actually I did. I mean, that again seems, I'm not sure why that's useful.
So I think that you're imagining, and this might be true in the future, right? Like all of these things are kind of static snapshots of what we could do more with. This is imagined as just the writing phase, right? You've done all the work. Now you need to communicate it, right? Now, you could say, Elena, in the right labs, you're writing throughout the process. And I would say, yes, that is ideal. But so if I'm just trying to write for an audience, I want to be informed about how people typically structure their documents. And as maybe I'm trying to describe the demographics of my participants, right? I might say, like in this figure, it says a few of, let's say this. Well, this is not I can show a live demo, but to answer your question about the process, like I'm reflecting on how to describe my participants. How do other people typically describe participants? Well, it'll show me 25 other participant descriptions. And show the overlapping language. It'll show me also what they wrote next, right? Like after you describe your participants, what other information do people often describe? And it may be that, one of the reasons why we have 25, not only to kind of like support that kind of emergent abstraction process, but also because, say, for the last 10 years, everyone described their participants in a particular way. And then, someone was like, hey, I'm going to split out non-binary, right? And I'm going to, leave out this other information, which I think is we no longer think it's kosher to include, right? That might be a minority and it's going to stick out because of this post-processing of the relationships. But you might say, yeah, actually, that's the way, that's the forefront. It's not the bulk, which a large language model would probably tell me about. That's kind of the forefront. I can recognize that's an unusually good example that I want to model mine off of.
And I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question about that, about the recency and also kind of the quality, right? Because in your previous example, you're like, there were like two that were similar, another one that it was not. I mean, it looks kind of weird. That's the third one, right? But what if that's the best one? But you only have like very simple, like very few examples or sparse examples.
So we always retrieve 25.
Oh, okay. So then you decide, or
the user is going to, sometimes
Got
you
it.
retrieve sentences and there's just not a lot of density, right? So they're like all, there's like this, maybe you're writing a sentence about, responsible AI, and it retrieves a bunch of other sentences about people talking about responsible AI in their introductions, because that's where you are,
Yeah.
right? And maybe there's just, yes, responsible AI is coming up again and again, but like they're talking about all sorts of different aspects. In that case, what we found in our user studies was that people were like, oh, that's an interesting paper. I bookmarked that paper. I'm going to go read that, right? Like it became a paper discovery mode, right? Which was unintentional on our part. But also when there's a lack of emergent structure, when you hit tab and retrieve those 25 sentences, then you are, if there's a lot of emergent structure, you want to break that structure intentionally if you're going to. And if there's a lot of diversity, then you can be inspired by examples, but it's not like, oh, people have certain expectations. Did you have a question?
Oh, I'm kind of along the lines of what Dan was saying. If you do it earlier in the project, but also you can do it when you're reading. And if you do it when you're reading, maybe you discover examples like that, and which you can then use to inform you're writing. I mean, if you learn about the non-binary issue after you've already done the survey, then it's not really very useful, right?
Right. So I see. So, right. I guess, yeah, no, I it's funny. Okay, right. So, say instead of this central text area where you're writing, if that instead was a particular paper, you could do absolutely the exact same machinery would work, where it'd be like, here's how other people describe that. In that case, then you'd be like critiquing the paper. Yeah, that particular use case is like a little bit, I mean, harder for me to imagine doing. But yeah, this was intended as to reflect on to help surface emergent writing norms in a community that you're trying to speak to.
Right, which is super interesting, and clearly has value. Certainly, trying to break into a community, that's been a challenge. At the same time, it also seems like it leads to a homogenization of of papers as they all become closer. I mean, just thinking through it, if
Sure.
it got adopted,
Yeah,
it would lead possibly to a polarization, but also this anyway. I wonder, interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
What the effect would be if this got adopted widely.
well, my hope actually, so I think that
Whatever, yeah, that word. It's a hard
would
word.
be more likely to come from previous systems that only generate a couple examples, right, or only retrieve a couple examples or generate text, right? Because then it's what's most common, probably. You're not going to try to show people really unusual examples, probably, right? Whereas here, because we are thinking about how to present many examples in a way that you can see emergent structure when it exists, you're in the position where you can decide, you can say, wow, everyone's doing it this way, but I like this anomaly. I like that better, right? You are in the driver's seat in terms of like, I'm gonna follow this rule because I think it's a good one, and that's what my reader expects. I'm gonna break this one because I think those folks, the minority, got it right. So I think it can actually protect us. It get mindful.
You have such an optimistic view of human nature. I love it.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. Well, let me just quickly go through the user study here. And also happy for any of these things to show you live demos. But I also want to make sure that we get through both key systems. So we had within subjects, 16-person study. 15 were actively writing a Chi manuscript at the time. We had them draft the structure of the paper they were working on and then draft the text. They had in terms of the document level writing support, they found that the section title frequency was used to gauge norms as we expected and hoped. Some adapted section titles for from the distribution, others just modified their existing titles. And they noticed variation within section title clusters. So you can see, like, if you opened up one of these, the implementation cluster, everything mentions implementation in this cluster, but some are like implementation details, disco band, that was like a particular system implementation of data lists, different ways to kind of people name their implementation sections. Some found it helpful to see uncommon titles. And this person said, the section titles are more diverse than I thought. There are things like, expert interviews, which I've never done. There were a few others that I found that are pretty new to me. It definitely broadens my sense, my horizon. So this speaks actually to exactly your anticipated benefit that we were not thinking about at all when we built this, which was, okay, you're writing, you're already done. Okay, but next time, maybe you could have done something a little bit different. Yeah, some opted. So my optimism is perhaps slightly informed by data that some did opt to deviate from the implied norms, right? When they could see that there was variation. It was almost the variation that the surfaces gave them permission. Okay, at the sentence level, utility was that they alternated between iterating on the prose and engaging with these retrieved sentence examples. They used retrieved sentences for terminology, phrasing, structure, and ideas, right? So, you certainly don't want to reinvent terminology, for example. They discovered relevant literature for citations, often beyond the initial search goals. And this person said, it's great to read what others wrote because we performed a similar process, but we did not mention that in our own writing, so it would be great if we could add those. So like reflecting on, oh, someone else mentioned that, we should mention that too. We did that, right? I just didn't think to include it. It was exposure to similar work that boosted their confidence in their own writing, though obviously the limit, what is and isn't in the corpus, right? We don't want, if it's not there, for people to think it's never been there, right? Prior to the sense of novelty and unique topics, again, same kind of caution there. And then for the sentence rendering, right, we had these kind of different ways of trying to surface relationships across the retrieved samples. Many found it initially overwhelming, but it did improve their efficiency, skimming, and structure recognition. And graying out repeated words had some mixed feedback. So, we're still kind of iterating on how we show that emergent structure. So I think one of the reasons why this didn't work so well is because we did not actually have a algorithmic structural mapping engine suggesting alignments. We were just at the more superficial level noting commonalities across them. So, this, especially for the drafting of text, it was didn't have time to have like a comparison with some other tool. So this, just at least with drafting of the structure, people are preferred having CorpusStudio than, I guess, like blank page. Not surprising there. People felt with drafting prose, where there was no baseline, they still rated that they agreed with the that evaluating many sentences from other previous papers at once gave me a better understanding of the typical writing expectations of the target venue. And so, yeah, this alternative approach, right, of retrieve many examples and post-process them is, I believe it makes users more resilient to the AIs and their own plagiarism risks and AI retrieval quality, right? So we're overall in our group trying to think about how do we make interfaces that make users resilient to AI choices that are objectively wrong, subjectively disliked, or contextually inappropriate, right? Making sure that the interface supports them in noticing and having the context to judge that, right? Because a lot of the stuff we're showing it to people, we're like, hey, double check, right? I don't have the optimism that they all double check. And if I don't do additional work to give them the context that makes that double checking reasonable in terms of effort, I definitely don't think they will. All right, so if you want to read more about AI resilient interfaces, we have kind of a draft on on archive. We also have our original first AI resilient kind of alternative to summary. Oh, yes.
Sorry, I didn't.
I was just going to say that our first AI resilient interface is an alternative to document summarization that I think actually would work in Semantic Reader quite well. That was a Chi 24, and I'll show that to you real quick. And we continue to iterate on this idea, thinking about domains of high stakes, right, like law, working with Harvard law professor, and interviewing currently, showing these off to lawyers and doing some need finding to understand what high stakes reading and writing professions would accept, find useful, etc. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, maybe I missed it, but if you had any kind of support for decontextualizing, like you're trying to bring in all these snippets from all these different papers, and they have a lot of different contexts that could be hard to reason about, and so I was wondering if users found that challenging, or if you had any features to support that. Like we've have built a couple of systems that have done this, like sight read and relatedly.
Yeah.
So like decontextualization, wondering about that.
The only, excellent point. The only contextualization that we added was when you, like, I forget exactly how you invoked it, but you could hover over it, I guess, and have a direct link to the original paper, see the sentence before and after. So these were kind of, it was information sent to contextualize it if you wanted to see it, the environment. And that's actually how a lot of folks kind of discovered papers that they wanted to engage with further. But I think that because it was decontextualized, that helped people see the emergent patterns associated with like communicating that particular point. So while decontextualization has downsides, which we tried to mitigate, the upside was the kind of focal presentation, if that makes sense.
Or I guess I was wondering also about, just using different, if you could normalize the different contexts when you're presenting the snippets, and if you think that would be a good use of language models.
Oh, like re-rendering the text, like since, oh, interesting. Right. Large language models can regularize the text in a sense. I think we might be getting to a place where research taste might dominate in a certain sense. Like it might be up to the user or the researcher about whether they're comfortable reading something that didn't occur in the original document. So there's benefits to that in the regularization, and there's drawbacks in terms of like a layer of not indirection, but a layer of a separation from the original. So for a lot of our work, we really challenge ourselves to re-render the original text so that we are more resilient to AI choices that, otherwise we might have a hard time kind of recognizing it's not good for us. Yeah.
So actually, I'm going to change the topic if you don't have a follow-up. So in this case, it seemed like for a system like this, it's really helpful for people who are trying to go cross-domain. But I'm not sure from the user study that you have, I assume that it's not that
Right.
case
The
yet.
people who found this valuable were people from the same corpus that the corpus was composed of. And yet we still found value. And I think it's making the implicit explicit that I think they were responding to, right? As well as when you're training, right? People enter our community and they've only read 10 papers, right? Maybe they took one graduate class, and you have a professor who's been doing this for a gazillion years, and they have strong ideas about how a paper should be structured, how a study should be designed, but they can't externalize it that easily because it's just like, when you see it, it's all up here, right? So when you have a bunch of examples that are retrieved, one of the features that I didn't mention, but you can save these things in user notes and annotate. Why is this a great example of how to write a blah, right? And so someone who's in a teaching position or kind of setting expectations can develop basically a style guide grounded in actual text, right? Because a lot of style guides are like super high level, or kind of otherwise, so it kind of helps a more concrete style guide, which can be a very personal thing, even group specific. Okay, so
Could it even be a feature, right? Like an opportunity, like for some people to say, oh, I want to see from the same field, or can you also check from different ones?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, what is the people reaction when, let's say, you are an AI researcher and you are trying to write an SCI paper?
Yeah.
What would they?
that would be a really fun follow-up to do. Yeah. Because we do, I mean, this, so there's within group benefits and cross group. Okay, so I'll also just point out that, the more effectively we render the cross example relationships, the better we mimic the kind of support that our internal structural mapping engines need. I think that the more helpful this is. And I'm saying that from a position of having made systems that do this over and over again. So I think that's what makes this a particular approach, I think, work when it does work. Okay, so I'm just gonna, because it's so, I think, potentially relevant to semantic reader, I'll just quickly tell you about slightly older work, just one previous Kai ago, the AI resilient text rendering. So this was led by Ziwei Gu, a wonderful PhD student who, unfortunately, because of visa situations, cannot present AbstractExplorer, which I'll present next in Korea. I'll go instead. But AI resilient alternatives to summarization are basically the exact same document. And we're just changing the salience of the word. We do that by preserving the grammar of the sentence in these basically recursive extractive summaries that are reified in text salience.
Love recursive extractive summaries, even though I don't know what they are. But what is AI resilient? Sorry, what's the motivation? Why do I want AI resilience? What is that?
Right. So AI resilient interfaces, which is something I've been iteratively defining, is interfaces that help you, that enable you to notice and give you the context to judge when AI choices that have been made on your behalf are objectively wrong, contextually inappropriate, or just subjectively disliked relative to something else they could have provided. So this is the first time we felt like we made a truly AI resilient interface for the task of as an alternative to a summarization feature, right? So here, because all the original text is there, the system in these recursive extractive summaries, kind of as it kind of cut out words while minimally changing the semantics of the original sentence at each sentence level, it's preserving what was cut out still there. So you can read just the black. It's grammatically correct and preserves the majority of the semantics. If you want to, at any point, kind of dip down into the details, you can start reading the successively lighter and lighter levels of gray that are still always legible.
Right. So at least in this, and not to quibble about terms, but I don't like the term. Seems like there's the issue about how can a reader gist the document quickly and yet be able to verify when AI makes, verify that the answer is correct, since an AI might make a mistake somehow.
Verify is maybe not quite the term I would use, just because because we're getting into subjective and personal beliefs, right? So if I summarize a document for you, and I have to make choices about what to leave out, right? And only way you're going to know whether or not you liked what I left out is to read the summary and then read the entire document, and for your memory to keep track of what was and wasn't included.
Right.
And so, and there might be, if you are reading a document and you have a lot of, unseeable context in your head, it's impossible for me to always guess right as an AI. This was like, how do we protect you from hallucinated any additions and any removals? How can we help you notice them, because they never went away. We never hid anything.
But you did, there is a change.
There is no change.
So a person's perception is likely to spend more time on the dark words and less time on the other words.
Yes.
Of course, a person could read the light words, but if they do read every one of the light gray words, then it saves them absolutely no time and there's no benefit to the technique.
Well, so when you're looking at a line, right? Like if you say, fixate on this word, you're still taking in local context, right? See here, I have
But you can, presumably you can pick and choose where you want to read the gray. And
yes, and that's actually a
according
feature.
to you can read the gray, which again, sort of like it's a verification. When you get to a particular part, is it easy to get more context or more detail? And
You're thinking about it, I think, in a verification sense. And I'm thinking of it just as I'm reading, right? And I'm like, so we did a follow-up eye tracking study to see how it changed their engagement with the text. People generally describe 2 levels of reading, right? So they would skim and mostly stick to the black stuff. And they would be like, okay, I got a big picture view, right? It's like, it's easy to read these grammatically correct sentences that are shorter than all the others. And then oh gosh, I'm being asked about X, or I'm really interested in Y. I know where in the document to go back and read about that, right? So, okay, so to your point, absolutely. Like there is some lossiness in that maybe I'll see kind of at the edge of my vision, grayed out text that I, decide to ignore enough that I don't notice that grayed out text was inappropriately demoted, right? But I sure have a better chance of noticing that than if it was hidden.
Absolutely. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what's the problem? Is the problem the AI, or is the problem that the AI hallucinates?
The problem is that I have little control over what an AI chooses to include or exclude in a summary. And so I want to sidestep that entirely. And guess what? In our study, right, we had a baseline, which is word frequency-based text alias modulation. In that they read slower and were less accurate answering GRE reading comprehension questions. With GPTSM, they were significantly more accurate in answering these questions, and they did it significantly faster. So we know that we are providing value.
And so, I'm sorry, so can you explain the two non-normal conditions?
Yeah, so normals, right, like everything's black. Word frequency, text salience modulation is, I mean, it is what's documented in the literature as kind of like, of course you could do that. It's not grammar preserving, right? So if you go to every black word, it's kind of like, it's like seeing a movie at too slow a frame rate, that where actions aren't necessarily reactions to each other. And grammar preserving text salience modulation is, the one that's got more accuracy for users and faster.
So one of those conditions, I'm still not sure if I understand. So GPTSM is what you just showed with the black and the gray. Normal, everything's black. Presumably there's also a condition where you just didn't show the gray. Is that what W?
That's what normal is. Everything is black.
So the
Right.
difference is that it's a grammar.
Is there something where instead of graying out certain words, you just didn't show those words and you just showed the shortened version?
That was a variant that we tested before we got to this one. We found that people futzing with showing and hiding those, what would otherwise be statically shown as gray words, added time because of the interaction and didn't add a lot of benefit. It added cognitive load.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is, don't give them those controls at all. Just show them the AI summary without the particular.
So these
word verification.
So then you'd be testing whether or not the GRE comprehension questions were asking about things that were or weren't judged to be important by the AI.
Exactly. It just seems like whether that, sure. And so when the AI does really well, then it's probably going to be the best because it's going to be super fast and it's going to have all the relevant information. When the AI does a terrible job, it's going to be really terrible because it does show the information and there's no way to recover.
I think that you are still in a frame of reference, which is not an inappropriate one, but a different one that I'm in, right? So
I think so.
the frame of reference I'm in is I'm coming with particular reading goals that are unobservable. I'm coming with particular preferences. Say I'm a judge. A paralegal might know the county we're in, my preferences to, like, in particular situations be a little more lenient, right? Maybe they can be a better AI summary, sorry, paralegals are being replaced by AI. So, a paralegal summary might have that model of me, right? But that takes time to develop, right? So if we are going to introduce automation, rather than the automation trying to model my moment-to-moment priorities or particular context, this is I'm trying to help people be more resilient with just kind of out of the box. So, I mean,
Because I think that a summary for me I think is a part of like what is a correct summary, right? And a correct summary, there's no correct definition of a summary.
So absolutely agree. And yet this metric has got one in there because it's a number of GRE comprehension questions. So that's one particular metric that you used in the study.
I guess we wanted to make sure that we were not harming people's ability to do a basic reading comprehension task. And we found that we didn't harm it, we actually made it better, right? But I'm not saying that this is necessarily the only way you should evaluate this. In fact, people subjectively strongly preferred it. So, okay, I don't want us to get too hung up on this. In a certain sense, some people are going to like it, some people aren't. But I do think that it's illustrative of this AI resilient approach, right? Because you have the context of the entire document for the things that in most situations would have been hidden.
So I guess what I really would, because I actually think we're in a very similar space, and I have, I think, probably the same goals you do in terms of the kinds of interfaces that I'm aiming for. There are other approaches one could do. For example, clicking to see more or follow-up questions, or bunch of interactive techniques as opposed to just sort of changing the salience. What I'm hung up on is a statement of what are the goals and objectives that you're trying to, what do you mean by AI resilience? Can you state that sort of
Yeah,
formally?
I will state that again formally.
Great.
It is an interface that gives you
Control.
support to notice, gives you the context to judge what you notice, right? And to ideally easily override AI choices that are objectively wrong, contextually inappropriate, or just subjectively disliked compared to other options that it could have provided. So here, right, you mentioned interaction is another approach. Yes, it is. But what would trigger me if something is hidden? What would trigger, why should I open up the details? You gave me a summary. Why do you want me to then click to see the unsummary? You know, it's like almost asking me to undo my own work. Whereas here, right, I'm designing it such that the summary is just kind of like, it's there, you can ignore it, you can read it, like you can, without lifting a finger, modulate the degree of granularity with which you read a document.
I think we should take it offline.
Okay, I see we're chatting more. I want to help you understand it, because if I'm making some, that's why this AI resilient piece is a working draft as we continue to iterate on these techniques. Okay, so the final idea, I'll be really fast here. All of the work that you guys have been doing, as I understand it, and a lot of the work that I've talked about is a single document focus, right? You're enhancing your ability to skim it effectively, basically giving information sent about what you could and couldn't skim. You can augment from a corpus, like CorpusStudio, even though it was not a reading environment, it was a writing environment, you're kind of bringing in documents from the corpus to enhance your understanding of a particular document. So what if instead we were allowing ourselves to release the view of the corpus through the lens of a single document? We didn't have to make that choice anymore. So I think that, again, this notion of understanding that internal machinery is going to help us see, by computing and rendering the relationships across abstracts. In this case, we're going to try to show the 1,000 abstracts at Chi. If we think about how people understand the relationships between those abstracts and pre-compute and reify those relationships, then we might give them kind of a leg up to understand the corpus as a whole. So, so this will be, this AbstractExplorer is a mouthful, but every word is very carefully chosen. Leveraging structure mapping theory to enhance comparative close reading at scale. This is the first time I'm talking about it, so again, there's like it's like, we got some screenshots as opposed to actual authors, but this was also led by Ziwei, and just accumulate, and Joyce is the second author, kind of accumulated people as we tried to make this work. Structural mapping theory, just really quickly, it deals with representations, alignments of those representations of objects in your corpus, and comparison, right? So if you have a representation, you can align the representations, and once you have an alignment, then people naturally compare the analogous components within that alignment. If that makes sense. So we're just constantly doing this subconsciously. That comparison can reinitiate or even start if you notice a difference. It can also be what starts the alignment process, right? How do you decide that objects are sufficiently similar that it makes sense for your brain to engage in this effortful work? And that alignment, as you are doing that process, can actually inspire a better, more kind of appropriate representation, and you can kind of figure out yourself through here if you're not providing, or just naturally in the course of looking at things. Within that alignment, you are particularly drawn subconsciously to alignable differences and commonalities. This is kind of the raw material of that abstraction process that we want to support people in doing, because they have a better mental model. So structural alignment support tools like that, like the left and right hand side in CorpusStudio, again, this is kind of what my group does. We try to propose representations that can then, on which we can compute candidate alignments for you. And we also try to show comparison. If we don't feel comfortable kind of having a representation and computing alignment entirely ourselves, we can at least try to support inviting your comparison, which will hopefully potentially imply a structural alignment that your brain can come up with. Okay, so we've tried this SMT-informed approach in other domains. We've done this for many different examples of, like, say, visual for code examples of different libraries that people are trying to understand what the library can and can't do and compare libraries at the level of the code examples they would actually have to work with. We've also done this in the previous year with many outputs, like 100 outputs of a large language model to the same or similar prompts, where there's a lot of regularity in the language. That's where the positional diction and clustering that I pointed out kind of helped people form better mental models of the behavior of a large language model by looking at these outputs. And so we used GPTSM, various other kind of like markup attempts to see if something like this might help people do the process of comparing across abstracts at the level of analogous sentences within them. So, had some mock-ups. Participants also, I mean, they appreciated, basically, the TLDR of this formative study is people did not balk at some of our weird ideas, right? So we're like, great, we're gonna keep going. Some participants also mentioned, because they were aware of generative AI tools at that point, they said that they might help them figure out key points of a specific piece, but may find it unhelpful if they often miss some of the key information. So there was some, awareness in these folks already of that generative AI would not solve all their problems. So we took each abstract from the previous Chi, segmented it by sentence, and then classified those sentences into different aspects. You could almost think of it as like faceted browsing of enabling a faceted browsing of the abstract. So within, I guess, across all of these aspects, we also, at the sub-sentence level, kind of segmented in these grammatical respecting boundaries. So like, we don't want to cut up a grammatical phrase. Used kind of classified segments within the sentences by their role, right? Like describing the participants, describing the contribution, system characteristics, and reified that in color. So one of the views, we have many, probably won't have time because it's 10:55 to look at all of them, but so for example, this was for all the sentences that described that had the structure of a contribution and then a system characteristic, right? You can basically read across abstracts from, here's all the Chi abstracts. It was a very long list, and you're just seeing the top, but that talk about the system they built and what it did. You can still click into the full abstract to see the context if you want, but we were primarily interested in how we could help you see this cross document relationships. So, so this is like a minimally lossy structural mapping theory informed technique for reading, skimming, and reasoning about a corpus of similarly structured short documents, in this case, just the abstracts. And it helped people skim and read closely and laterally, right? Laterally is in a cross abstract. We did an ablation study where basically this grouping of sentences that had similar structure together, as well as the highlighting and their alignment along where the parts of their sentences aligned, that we basically turned them on or off and found that folks who had they have low need for cognition, which is basically kind of people who it's a psychological construct called need for cognition that approximately describes how much effort you are willing and want to engage in. If you were a high need for cognition person, you were like, get all this away. I don't want to skim. I want to read every single sentence exactly. And if you were a low need for cognition, you were very happy to have this pre-processing and to see the emergent patterns. So to give you an example, right, like when you didn't have all the features turned on, people would often read mostly across. And then when we had all those features turned on, if they were willing to be led by the system, they could read, across rather than within. And so in a summative study where we had people write a survey on Chi 2024 papers, where we asked them to skim as many abstracts as possible, develop a mental model of the range of contributions, methodologies, problem domains, and study results, identify 3 emergent patterns and content styles. So basically just, mental model, what happened at Chi last year? We found, folks were able to take advantage of these features, right? And they, so it was mentally demanding, but they felt supported. I'm not going to go into the details there because I'll just finish with 2 key quotes here. One said, it's very helpful to get familiar with large numbers of articles or topics in a short time, especially most papers have a similar structure. And the way it groups and renders sentences makes it very easy to skim through many papers in this conference, something hard to do with traditional interfaces. So weird paper, but it feels like my white whale. I'm really happy that it exists. I think it's the closest we've ever gotten to helping people like see all of Chi at once, because usually you go there and you see a couple papers, and it's great to be able to dive deep, put that big picture view instead of a bunch of dots. You can't read dots. It can give you a big picture view that you can actually read without even changing the text of the original papers that people have slaved over to get just right. So I'll end there.